Now. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Casby. I'm a conservation director serving Southeast Nebraska for the AmeriCorps Common Ground program. The Common Ground program holds educational webinars and events about conservation issues such as water quality, clean energy, and soil health. We focus on educating the public and preserving Nebraska's natural legacy. A couple items before we start. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those in the Q&A option below or the chat box below, and make sure to direct them to all panelists and attendees. At the end, you will be asked to fill out a quick survey once the webinar is done and you exit. We would love for you to complete the survey as it helps us measure our outreach and is used for grant reporting purposes, so we can continue doing events like these. I have Rita with me. She is also a conservation director. She will be helping out with any questions that you have or technical issues. Today, we are joined by Dan Schultz from the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District. Dan has been working with saline wetland restoration for over 30 years here in eastern Nebraska. He has worked with many organizations, including Pheasants Forever, the Nature Conservancy, and the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, to preserve and restore saline wetlands around the Lincoln area. These ecosystems are very unique in the country and are home to many threatened and endangered species. So whenever you are ready, we can get this started. All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me this evening to talk a little bit about saline wetland restoration. I understand you've had previous speakers. I believe Ted LaGrange gave you some stuff about history or like that. So I'm going to talk about some restoration. The most recent one, what we've done, and show you some of the results that we were able to experience. As the slide shows, it was estimated that pre-European settlement, there was about 16,000 acres of these saline wetlands in and around Lancaster and Cass County. The map that you see in red shows essentially what is left, which is estimated to be about 4,800 acres. A lot of those properties, the complex in the upper right is the Jackson Wildlife Management Area, and there's been some recent acquisitions by Pheasants Forever to add on to that complex. And then as you move to the southwest on the map, that's Little Salt Creek, where the marsh wren restoration is located at the mouth of Little Salt Creek. And then there's still some remnant saline wetlands in and around Lincoln. About 20 years ago, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started talking about listing the Salt Creek tiger beetle, that kind of energized the local partners in the city of Lincoln, the Natural Resource District and Game and Parks, and at that time the Nature Conservancy. Out of some of those early discussions, there was an environmental trust grant that was acquired that allowed the Saline Wetlands Conservation Partnership to be formed. Those original members were the City of Lincoln, the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, the Nature Conservancy, and the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District. Like I said, that's been around for about 20 years, and the Nature Conservancy has backed away from working on some of the saline wetlands. They're still involved with some things, but we wanted to maintain a nonprofit partner in that, and now we have Pheasants Forever in that partnership. Can you go to the next slide, please? A big effort that's underway right now is the district, on behalf of the partnership, applied for a PL 566 grant through USDA that's administered by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. When we applied for that, we were wrapping up upper Little Salt restoration plan. This is a slide of it. It goes essentially from in the lower right corner is North 14th Street and goes upstream from 14th Street to the to West Branch Oak Road, which is the upper extent of the known saline wetlands in the district. Those dots, I don't know if you're able to read the legend on there, but that in that plan that identifies a lot of things dealing with actual in-channel things, vegetation, remeandering of some of the channelized stream and a variety of other things. The next slide shows a plan that was done jointly with the Natural Resource District and the City of Lincoln prior to the planning effort I just talked about that looked at improvement projects in Little Salt Creek watershed. And when the district applied for this PO 566 funding, we were granted $300,000 to do a couple of things: combine the capital improvement project plan, the upper Little Salt plan, and extend down from the upper Little Salt plan all the way to the mouth of Little Salt Creek. So, that would encompass the entire watershed, and also develop a work plan, a new work plan EA that includes both those plans and the additional area. One thing that's interesting about this application is traditionally PL 566 program is what built the majority, if not all, of the flood protection above Lincoln in Salt Creek watershed, Oak Creek, and North Oak. When that program went away several years ago, and they've now got funding to revitalize that, and now have part of that which you can do not only the traditional flood control stuff, but they are focusing on environmental things. And as far as we know, the only other environmental PL 566 project that's been done is in I believe in Cape Cod. So this is new ground for a lot of different people. So there's 3 steps to this. The $300,000 is 100% reimbursed by NRCS. But the next step, if we get funding and approval, would be to do final plans and specifications that come out of this. And then the third step would actually be funding to implement what's identified in the plan. And I had sent Laura a link to the PL 566 website by the district's consultant, the Platte Water Group, if you have more interest in learning about what's going on with that. Okay, Laura. Okay, this map shows the northern part of Lincoln. 27th Street is shown there on the left. You see Interstate 80. You can see where Marsh Wren is outlined there, and that's what we're going to focus on. The district originally got to work or started working in this area when the North 27th Street interchange was put in, which made that real estate very valuable for development. And we ended up working with Mark Whitehead of Whitehead Oil Company, who acquired a significant portion of that property and ended up donating and adding on to what's identified there as the Whitehead Wetlands. You can see the development that's taken place around that. Just north of that is property that was purchased by Dial, if you're familiar with those hotels and stuff. As part of that project with Dial's development, the NRD ended up acquiring, donated a conservation easement on wetlands there. The partnership picked up Dakota Springs, which is owned by the city and the NRD manages. And then also there's a Schleich wetlands, and you can see where Salt Creek is shown there. The mouth of Little Salt is where that pointed part is by Marsh Wren, and then you can see south of Salt Creek where the old landfill was there, and also to the east over to the road on the right there is 56th Street. So we're going to talk about Martran. So the next one, please. Okay, the Martran restoration. It was the first time that the partnership did a restoration where we looked at adding salt water back to the landscape. The Flatwater Group was the consultant that put together this plan that was selected by the partnership. The piece on the right side, about the right half of that, with the all of that used to be school land, which was the Nebraska Hunt Club. The partnership purchased that. There was some property to the west of that, which was privately owned by Russell Anderson. He was interested in selling the portions that weren't involved with his farming activities. And so you can see, I believe, the boundaries there that go down to Salt Creek. And then very early on, before the partnership was formed, there was Mr. Anderson donated to the NRD the property on both sides of the mouth of Little Salt Creek. One of the things that we've learned over the years to do these is it's very important to do site characterization. And I don't know how well you can see some of this stuff, but that involved putting in a number of yellow dots, which were shallow wells to monitor the groundwater level. There was also an extensive network of soil probes that were put in place to see what kind of soils were there. There were a lot of places identified that, or there was an extensive vegetation survey that was done to see what was there prior to the restoration. That kind of light brown area was areas that documented what we call dispersive clays, soils that can cause problems. The light green areas in the upper right, and also kind of straight left of where it says freshwater pond, were areas that through the soil probing we found that there was a lot of sedimentation covering up the historic salmo soils, salty soils, which the wetlands need. And then there's some light blue areas where we looked at pulling back shoreline on an existing freshwater pond that the Nebraska Hunt Club had used for years for dog training. And then in the lower left, there at the mouth of Little Salt Creek, there was an area identified where we were going to pull back the bank at a couple of different elevations depending on the different flow events in the Little Salt Creek, because we had done some of these what we call habitat shelves, and they're fairly successful. I think most of you have seen the creeks in and around Lincoln. They're deeply incised, they were channelized, and so they downgraded considerably. Historically, there was a lot more mechanisms for the salt water to naturally flow, and a lot more of it to flow to the surface. That incision and the other effects of development and channelization interrupted some of those pathways, and so that's one of the things that we tried to or we did reestablish some connection there. There's several water level control structures that were involved with this. We looked at putting in infrastructure that would intercept adjoining land runoff and direct it away from the site. We also purchased some ground out of the floodplain, which was very expensive. It was like $18,000 an acre, but we knew we needed that to be able to do some of the restoration stuff, put in some berms to intercept runoff water, fresh water from the adjoining crop ground, and then and also the development that was going on adjacent to the property. The other part of that was those water level control structures. If I don't know if you can see that, but we have the ability to move water, salt water and fresh water, essentially all over this property as we need. So that capability to manipulate the hydrology is very, very important. Another neat thing about the site, that red arc in the bottom right is kind of the protection zone. There had been active bald eagle nests there for several years. I think that's all I'll say about that. So saltwater irrigation. In the past, on some previous restoration projects, the partnership kind of dabbled in using some small capacity wells, solar powered wells to come to the surface. We also did a study, a several year study with UNL, where we took kind of salty water that was shallow from a well, and then we had a deeper well, and then a very deep well with different salinity levels, and there was some experimentation going on to bring that to the surface with solar panels, and then and kind of see how those little boxes, so to speak, responded to the addition of the salt water. There were two wells that were put into place, saltwater wells. What you see on the upper right is all that is PVC irrigation pipe with gates every few feet. That's showing some of the early pumping that we did. Below that is the west distribution system. Each one of the two distribution systems has 900 feet of irrigation pipe in 3 different sections. We have the capability to turn off and on any of those sections with valves. And then of course we can control how much water is delivered by the pipes just by opening and shutting different gates on that. Those pipes were laid on a gravel bed with the idea that the salt water would be pumped out on that, infiltrate down, and then spread out. What you see in the left picture and the lower right one, those big gray areas is the sediment that was removed as part of this project. That was a huge part of this because the soil probes indicated that there was between a foot to 20 inches of sediment that had accumulated over the years, so we wanted to get down to those Salmo soils. And so there was a lot of dirt moved in this. The left picture shows the observation deck that's out there. And so I don't know, hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to go out there and look, but this is showing it just kind of as it was being built and after the sediment was removed in those areas. Go ahead. The saltwater wells. The east well, as you can see, was 216 feet deep. We utilized our staff geologist and also conservation and survey geologist to help us when we did the test holes and to make sure we had the best chance of finding salt water, and we certainly did. There were 2 wells drilled. We have about 20 to 40 foot of screen on those, and they're designed to pump the 250 gallons a minute. And the NRD regulates wells and well permits, and so we had to issue ourselves a well permit and apply for a saltwater well based on our rules and regulations. You can see there below, the upper stuff is quaternary, silts and clays and sands, and then you get down into the Dakota Formation, and then even lower where the saltier water is at. Those wells were drilled in September of 15 by a contractor that the Flatwater Group hired, Sargent Irrigation, out of Geneva, Nebraska. You want to go to the next one? So how salty is this water? it's very salty that's coming out of these wells. You can see by this table the comparison between fresh, brackish, and seawater levels of some of those different constituents. Some of this water is as has a, you know, the sulfate is the same as seawater, and you can see how close some of those other constituents are to seawater. So the geologist made the point down here that we're about 2/3 of the way to seawater. So we knew that we had hit the salt water supply that we wanted to utilize for this restoration. Are you going to cue me on time, Laura? I can get to rambling and lose track.
You're still good. We're at 6:23 right now, so we can go for another 15 or so minutes.
Okay, so the next slide, please. Here's another shot of the distribution system early on. I think I kind of talked about that. I guess I will point out, as you look, while you're looking to the east, you can see those trees that don't have any leaves on. Those are being impacted by the salt water that we're applying, and I'll try to point some of that out in some of these next slides. So go ahead. So the results, this is the east distribution system. If you see that line kind of in the middle that goes straight out, that's that observation deck. We're looking to the southwest towards the city of Lincoln. You can see the freshwater pond or lake in the middle there. And then as you come lower, there's a line of trees there. In that corner, that lower left corner is the sediment structure. It holds water, and we have a water level control structure on it, but that's to intercept the runoff that's coming from the north. Those straight lines just north of that is the distribution system. And what I'm trying to show here is you can see that the salt water is starting to affect the existing vegetation, which was essentially, for the most part, reed canary grass, and there was other vegetation more associated with what you would consider more of a freshwater wetland. And if you look, can you see that one tree that has some shade kind of in that brown area that's delineated there? I want you right there. Keep an eye on that as we move to the next slide. And okay, so here's that same area again. On the lower right is one of our well installations. There's a buried pipe that goes to a T that forks off, that goes in the upper left there. You can see that white line. That's the irrigation. So the pipe, that's 300 feet of pipe, and you can see that tree that's dead. And you can see how the vegetation continues to change, and we're actually starting to create some areas of there with no vegetation that are becoming very salty. As of now, and I haven't checked this spring, but we have really all of the salt tolerant plants, which are called halophytes, there in this basin, except for the state endangered salicornian. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think you can easily see where the salt water is getting to and where it's not. Those wells are kind of on a hill, and that slopes down to the east. And of course, we're in the middle of a urbanizing environment, as you can see by the housing development. Next slide, please. This is the same basin looking to the northeast, and it does a really good job of showing that lower middle is that green blob. That's where our water level control structure is, and we can manipulate how much salt water we hold there. But I think this picture shows does a really good job of showing the extent of where this, the salt water has reached and its effects on the vegetation. There's some excuse me, there's some subtle elevation changes throughout that, which when they stripped off the sediment, we told them we did not necessarily want it to be smooth and flat and even, that they're, having different undulations in there and stuff would be a benefit to creating some of the salt flats in some of those areas that still naturally occur. So go ahead. Here's that same basin. I think a year or so later, the tree's losing its branches, and you can see how it's starting to change in some of the white that's showing up in this basin. Okay. This is the west distribution system not long after it started. The dead vegetation, the tree, you see a green tree by that pile of brush, and then the dead tree. We'll look at that in a little bit later, but this is the west distribution system and some of the early results. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, so about 2 years ago in October, when I was out there looking at it, was the first time that I saw the state endangered Salicornia on this west distribution system. There was quite a few plants in there. It was pretty exciting for me. We realized that we were making a difference. And you see the brush pile, the 2 dead trees, and then that kind of that the white, and then the dark brown. That was the extent at that time of the saltwort, which is a state endangered species that's unique to eastern Nebraska. But there's a lot of Salicornia on the coast, and they use it for salads, and you can go out and pick a piece, and it tastes salty, and it's a succulent. So that's some more of the results. That open water is what we call the Hemi Marsh, which we can keep as much water in there. But where those cedar trees are in the kind of the upper left, there's another water level control structure there, so we can manipulate that. It goes to an old oxbow, and then eventually goes through another water control structure into Salt Creek. So next slide. That dead tree, which was a honey locust, was alive, a handful of years ago, and now at the base, their spear scale, which is in the upper right, which is a salt tolerant plant, Atriplex is the genus, and then below that is the saltwort. So I thought this was really cool that just in a few years we were able to impact the vegetation there and get some of these species expanded on the landscape, which, and I should have mentioned this before, but where you're looking at where that tree trunk is dead, if you went back to the right, just a handful of years ago, that was farm ground that they tried to farm, but it wasn't too successful, but they kept planting it. And that was pretty neat. I thought that just a handful of years ago, crop ground, now we have these saline flats. So the next slide, please. This picture was taken by Ethan Fries, who's part of the Platte River time-lapse project. It's a really good shot that shows the Salicornia is a light green yellow there. You see the white pipe, which is the irrigation pipe, and that strip there is that gravel strip. It's pretty void of vegetation because of the salt, and it's seeped on farther to the right and created that salt flat. Go ahead. Below that distribution system and that last picture, there's a subtle change in elevation, and it slopes down towards the Hemi Marsh, and there's places where the saltwater has developed what you call preferential flow paths, where the water runs and moves moves over the landscape, and those green patches there is actually Salicornia that's coming in down below that big population and spreading out and is getting established where that saltwater flows. And we're continuing to learn and experiment on how we can do a better job of spreading the saltwater out on larger areas to try to increase the saline vegetation. Go ahead. This is a view of the east section of the west distribution system, which is east of that last slide that I showed you. And I think it does a very good job of showing the effects that we've had on the landscape with the salt water. You can see how it's gone to the right, and then also to the left where we have some pretty extensive salt flats that have formed. Those preferential flow paths, or those lines where it's draining off, we're going to do some modification of where that water leaves that area to try to pond more, so it expands out further and creates some more. We don't have any Salicornia or salt water on this site yet. It's been interesting the last couple of years. It's kind of creeping towards this area, but I still haven't found any there yet. So we're really expecting that to show up in the next year or two. And this is also a good example of the trees that have been impacted by the salt water, and those that have not. That one on the left, obviously is not getting salt, being impacted by the salt water. Okay. So yeah, here's a picture that was taken by a guy, Steve Cruz, when the eagles were still active, the bald eagle nests. You can still see them out there, and the nests out there, they've kind of moved upstream the last I knew, but that's essentially the end of my presentation. So I don't know how much time you have left, Laura.
About 5 minutes.
Okay.
If you have more.
No, I mean, let's open it up for discussion and see where people want to go. Unless you want to, and we can go back if people want to look at slides. I'm very open to whatever your audience wants to do.
All right, so we do have 2 questions so far, but if anybody else has any questions, you can either add it in the chat box or in the Q&A. Unfortunately, when you raise your hand, we aren't able to do anything with that. So I would like you to please put it in the Q&A box, and then we can get that all the answers for you guys. So the first one was, what were the natural processes that got interrupted or altered such that the site became a freshwater pond, or was the site not originally a saline wetland?
It was originally a saline wetland. The land use around it and the farming, it's not that those farm fields are that steep and erosive. It's just over time, when as land use changes around these, there's sedimentation that takes place, and that over time, over a long period of time, builds up and changes the plant communities. And like I said before, there after we took some of that silt off there, there's some freshwater shallow springs that showed up, but Little Salt Creek was channelized pretty severely, or straightened quite a bit, and downsized, which had some effects on impacting those saline springs that would have historically been there. Can you repeat the question? Maybe I didn't cover it.
So it was, what were the natural processes that got interrupted to decrease the saline levels?
Well, it would have been the salt water, the flow paths of the salt water naturally getting to the surface before development took place.
Okay.
And sedimentation.
And then we did see some of this, but how did biodiversity change throughout the process of the restoration?
Well, the diversity actually went south if you're counting species. There's not a lot of salt tolerant plants in these systems. Most of them are annuals, which makes things easier, from a land management standpoint to deal with. There's a few perennial plants such as the dwarf inland saltgrass, which um, is common in some of the not so salty areas, but um, there so the biodiversity really went down as far as the plant communities, but there's a lot of information still being gathered about the amount and the variety of insects that use these that are unique to these besides the Salt Creek tiger beetle, and then uh, creating these salt marshes are very good habitat for migrating shorebirds. There's a lot of use by those to have those mud flats on there and for foraging and everything like that. So uh, there's before we started, there was a large population of deer. There was all the fur bearers and all those other things. There's also on the site, was identified a long-eared owl, a short-eared owl winter roost site where some of them are. And so in some ways the biodiversity decreased, in other ways it may have expanded a little bit by providing habitat for some of that migratory um, bird species, shorebirds.
Gotcha. So from Lynn, he wants to know if there are any SCTB sightings there.
Sure. I should have covered that. That first area where we saw the Salicornia um, last year was the first time that we felt this, or the Game and Parks and Fish and Wildlife felt that. He's talking about the Salt Creek tiger beetle, right? SCTB. Yeah.
I believe so.
Um, uh, we actually released larvae out there for the first time on that west distribution system. Um, when we went back out there to releasing larvae is it's real quickly is you take essentially a stick, you make a hole, you get it out of its cup and coax it into the hole, which is its new burrow, and then hope for the best. We released several of those larvae out there, and then when we came back out to release adults that had been raised, before they were released, we actually saw Salt Creek tiger beetles had emerged and were running around out there. So we can talk about the rearing portion of this, but there's a very robust system that's done by the Topeka Zoo, the Lincoln's Children's Zoo, and primarily by the Henry Dorley Zoo, have been raising these beetles for several years now. And they're actually so good at it that we many times are challenged by finding what we feel is suitable habitat to release them. And so the short answer is yes, we have reintroduced those. They're going to continue to monitor to see if we get. It takes a couple of years to see if they've made it and laid eggs, and I don't know. We haven't decided yet if there's going to be more beetles released on this site or additional sites on Martran. I'd kind of like to have some flexibility yet to get the vegetation and some of the salt flats created, because there are some concerns about changing things when you have beetles on site, if that makes sense. It is a federally endangered species.
Gotcha. That
Did
makes a
that
lot of
answer
sense.
his question?
I think so. That was really clear. So we do have a couple more. There's quite a few, just so you're ready. So we have one that is just asking to describe the different banks cut into the creek to improve habitat. And then what kind of bank is it and whose habitat? So I believe that's from a different slide.
Okay, when we pulled back, the first time we tried pulling back and making what we call a habitat shelf. You know, it was done to try to create along Little Salt Creek what historically would have been um, uh, Salt Creek tiger beetle habitat, and then habitat for these halophytes. Um, we experimented with that, and every time we do a restoration, we learn more and kind of build on that. But when you walk along those incised channels, you can see where the salt deposits are, and a lot of times you can see where some of those seeps are located. And so, um, since we can, ideally, if you could recreate what was there and have those out of bank flows that spread out the salt water, and you still had the springs in the basin, you know, that would be ideal. But we're living in a different world now. So pulling back those banks, we look for areas where there's salt and maybe some moisture, and then in the marsh wren situation, we went down to a level that was just maybe a few feet from the base flow of Little Salt Creek based on the hydrograph. But then we also built or left part of a bench that was higher, that would be inundated in, say, a 10-year storm, a 1 in 10-year storm, to try to make some differences there. We got such a good bid from Yost Construction when we bid this out, that we actually expanded that shelf at the mouth of Little Salt Creek. It's the biggest one we've ever created, and we're still working on trying to get that put together. But you know, it's adaptive management. We're making this stuff up as we go and as we learn. So um, uh, it really depends on the site and your best instincts on where that might be a place to pull back the bank and try to create some um, near creek habitat shelves.
We have a couple from Richard. I'm gonna try to get back to the page he's talking about. So he's just wanting to know, what is the wetland south of the houses? I'm trying to remember what slide that was.
The wetlands south of these houses?
I believe so.
Well, we're looking at Marsh Wren, and Marsh Wren extends all the way down to Salt Creek to the right on the photo. And
Okay.
so that gets into there's it's not a levee, but there's been some bank stabilization along Salt Creek that was done as part of Suizo's development. I'm not sure I understand what he's trying to get at.
Sorry, there's quite a few.
Oh, on this picture, that wetland
Yes.
signature south of Salt Creek, those were historically some saline wetlands, but those have been severely impacted because that was part of one of Lincoln's landfills. You know, when the salt mining dried up, so to speak, and it wasn't no longer economically viable, then they started looking at what can we do with these wetlands. You know, the Great Salt Lake of Lincoln was around Capitol Beach. When the mining wasn't profitable anymore, you know, land uses changed, and this was one of those sites that was used for a landfill. If that answers his question.
So he also wanted to know if, sorry, I'm trying to get that different page. So on Ethan Freeze's
Yes.
photo, he wanted to know if those were phragmites towards the top. So I'm going to take it, he's talking.
Yep, I understand what he's getting at. Yeah, there's phragmites that we continue to work on out there. So some of that probably is phragmites. A lot of it also is some cattails, And that's one thing that we learned as part of the restoration, previous restorations, is how much sediment we need to take out and how much water depth we need to have to kind of retard the growth of of the the cattails. But that particular site, that particular site is actually a remnant uh, salt spring. We took some conductivity measurements out of that, and it is kind of salty. But Phragmites is one of the invasive noxious species that we continue to monitor and control. And that's probably narrowleaf cattail is what you're looking at.
And then we have still a couple more. They keep coming in. So from John, he wanted to know if or how did bison and Native American Indians use the salt flats? If you know.
I'm not sure if the native peoples utilize the salts or not. I don't know. And I know in upper, when you go up Little Salt Creek, it's not uncommon to find bison bones, teeth, you know, in the floodplain and in the creek, as you know, where those cut banks are. I'm aware of some pretty significant butcher sites. As part of that motocross project, there was a site that we found that they determined was a butcher site just on Interstate 80 south, just before you cross Salt Creek. There's quite a bit of evidence of native peoples using that. So I'm not sure anybody really knows other than what was written down in early journals. So I don't know if I can answer your question.
Okay, we did have a Maya in the chat said it was used as an intertribal salt basin, and a lot of the salt flats are human made. You might have more info. And then are there still high priority sites left to acquire to improve flow and connectivity? And can these be easements provided to farmers to put into WRP or similar programs?
Yeah, there's quite a few farmers that have put in land into WRP through the NRCS. The majority of those that I'm aware of are associated over in the Rock Creek area. There's a few up in Little Salt. The NRD, one of the first conservation easements I ever worked on negotiating was on some saline wetlands up east of Ceresco back in 1986. So there is some of that that's going on, and the district board remains open to utilizing things such as conservation easements to preserve some of these areas. You know, and of course, all of that's just based on landowners' interest and willingness to do that. That's landowners coming forward wanting to preserve these areas on a willing basis is how so much of that property along Little Salt Creek was acquired.
Gotcha. And then we had some people who missed the very beginning, and they just wanted to know what species that you're hoping will benefit from this.
All of the salt tolerant species, the state endangered Salicornia or saltwort, as habitat is restored or recreated, you know, we're going to continue to evaluate those for the release of the Salt Creek tiger beetle. So one thing I need to make clear, and I didn't do that when I was talking about the Saline Wetland Conservation Partnership. Yeah, when they talked about listing the beetle to begin with, that I said kind of got everybody energized and organized to do it. The partnership, the Saline Wetland Conservation Partnership, has been very careful not to be about the tiger beetle. We're about saline wetlands and the habitat and those other things. And if we can do things that the tiger beetle can, eventually utilize, that's all great. But it's about the resource and not the bug, if that makes sense. And that's very important because there's, over the years, there's a lot of people that we kind of maybe shouldn't categorize in this day and age as beetle bashers, but there's a lot of sediment and um, concerns about the Endangered Species Act and some of those things. But we've been very, very successful because we've been patient. We've worked with people as they've wanted to, and up until this last year, we had a great run with the Environmental Trust to fund this, but we've also got federal Section 6 money. We're working on this USDA stuff. The NRD's put in a lot of money. The city's put in a lot of money. The Nature Conservancy was a great source. Pheasants Forever has. So we just continue to work as best we can to keep moving forward. And yeah, there are some significant properties yet that we would like to acquire between this site and 27th Street, and also some other sites in Little Salt, Upper Little Salt. Yeah.
And it looks like we're starting to run low on time, but if you're okay with running a little over so we can answer the questions, that's totally fine. We do have 6 more in our Q&A, and some of them can kind of be brought together. So they wanted to know if the sites will become self-sustaining, or will the wells, water delivery systems, etc., always need to be regulated?
When we're doing, that was one of the things that, I kind of struggled with initially. This was Martran's a very engineered site, obviously, but the prior restorations that we did, it was pretty evident that we really weren't going to be able to bring back the source of the salt water like it originally had been. And so the short answer is yes, we're probably going to continue to have to pump these wells to get the salt source. But I think what's going to be interesting is we've put out millions of gallons of salt water on this landscape at Martran, and as those salts build up, we're gonna be able to throttle back some of the pumping that we do. We're still learning that, and so to make it resilient, I expect that we'll continue to have to pump these. These wells were put in with casings that are plastic. They it's not like the salt water is going to impact them. And so we tried to, they tried to design this system to be as resilient and have a long lifespan. So that is, that's the world we live in if we want to try to do this in a big way.
And then piggybacking off of that, how long do the water control structures last? And they're specifically talking about the wells and the PVC drainage systems.
The water level control structures should last quite a while. We've had some issues with burrowing mammals alongside, and we've got a contract now to fix one of the berms out at Martran. And some of that was how I was managing the water that encouraged some of that. But I don't, what was the other, the well should last a long time. What was the other part?
The irrigation, the PVC irrigation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It was just how long those structures last.
I'm not sure. I would expect us to, to get, 15 to 20 years easily out of it. This PVC pipe was designed to be, is actually irrigation pipe. So it's designed to be outside and like that. The wells, the lifespan on the well, that depends on a lot of things, but they were well constructed, and I would expect them to have a lifespan of 30 to 40 years without really doing too much to it. We would have ideally liked to have had those powered by solar panels, but the amount of energy that we needed to bring that water up in the volumes, in the amount of the amount of water and the depths we had to pump them, we had to bring in electricity from LES to do it. So
Okay. And then how did the 2021 cold spell impact Martran? That was back in February.
yeah, I don't have any indication it would adversely affected us. When we shut down the systems for the year, we make sure that it's drained out as much as we can, shut all the gates, and we have a little protocol for winterizing things. So I'm not sure, and we might not know until later in the growing season if there was effect.
Okay.
I wouldn't expect anything detrimental because of that cold snap.
And did you have any salt tolerant plants in the area, or are they coming back on their own naturally, or is it both?
We actually hired Prairie Plains Resource Institute when we bought that crop ground, which is left of this picture and a little bit to the right. And they collected some of those salt tolerant species and planted them. I don't know for sure if the seed they planted, that they collected some Salicornia. They have to have a permit to do that, the salt wort. And I don't know if it just took that long for the salt wort to germinate and find the right conditions, or this came in naturally off of animals or whatever. But all of the stuff, most of this stuff, especially in that eastern one over by that housing development, that was either in the seed bank or in the seed bank that had existed, or came in naturally, and that includes the sea blight, the spear scale, the marsh alder. Like I said, everything's essentially in there except for the saltwort.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. So we have two left, and they're kind of the same. They're about the locations again. So I'm going to go back to the map. This is from Richard again. He's talking about the Martran site to the east and south housing development. I'm not sure if east and south, yes.
Those two open water areas. Take your cursor and go now to the straight south, straight down, and then up a little bit.
Straight down and then.
Now go to the right. Just go to the right.
Here?
Is he talking about that?
Richard, I don't know if he's still on here. Let me see, because if he is.
Those are wetlands. They're I think they're freshwater wetlands on salty soils, but that's all part of the old landfill.
Okay, and then we also had, north of Salt Creek is one he's talking about.
North of Salt Creek, that's Martran. That lake there was put in by the Nebraska Hunt Club when they had a long-term lease with School Lands. That's who we bought it from, and we did some things to refortify the dam that they put in there, and we also did some stuff to pull back the banks there to have, so we could, as we manipulated the water level and dropped it down, we could expose more shoreline for the shorebirds. But there's a water level control structure that we can essentially drain that into Salt Creek if we need to. I don't know if I'm answering this question or not.
It's hard with the map. And then we had another one, which is just the name of the moor that's northeasterly.
Name of what?
Sorry. So what is the name of the moor that's northeast? The moor, sorry. Name of the more northeasterly saline wetland from the map. To the closer to the crossroads. It's hard to do it on the.
I don't understand. I'm sorry.
No problem. Is it okay if I share the website, the LPSNRD website, so they can contact you later for
Yeah.
any further questions? Okay.
Yeah. Did you give them that link, that Esri link, that Flatwater? Okay.
Yep, that is in the chat for anybody. That is just explaining the new restoration that's in progress and the planning that's going into it. If you look up just LPSNRD, I have it also in there. You can look up Dan Schulz in the search box on their website and it'll come up with his contact information. That way it's a little bit easier for everybody. And then, oh, I think this is maybe what John might have been talking about. Sorry about this. It's east of the Eastern Marsh. Yeah, I think it's going to be easier for everybody just to contact Dan a little bit more directly. That way we don't have to worry about any misinterpretation on this one. And then again, once you exit out of the webinar, you're going to be asked to fill out a survey that'll be really helpful to Conservation Nebraska. And it's used for our grants, so we can continue doing this later in the next year. I'm going to stop sharing.
Are we done?
We are done. We're a little past 7, so we're all good to go. Have a nice day, Dan, and thank you so much for doing this talk with us.
You're welcome. I hope you got what you wanted.
It was great.
Okay.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Nice to finally. I guess we met online, but nice to put a name to face to a name. So thanks.
Have a nice day.
You too.